Welcome to Sky Team's People First with Morag Barrett.
Welcome to this week's episode of People First, and I am honoured to introduce to you my friend and colleague at work, Dr. Jennifer Nash. Jennifer is a leadership expert and consultant to Fortune 50 organisations such as Google, Ford, ExxonMobil, JP Morgan, IBM, and the Boeing Company, and more. She is the founder and CEO of Jennifer Nash Coaching and Consulting, a leadership advisory firm helping successful leaders connect people and performance to deliver exceptional results. Her 25-year career includes serving in executive and leadership roles at Deloitte Consulting, Ford Motor Company, and is an adjunct professor at the University of Michigan. She contributes to Harvard Business Review, has presented her research at Columbia University, and is a Harvard McLean Institute of Coaching Fellow. You can learn more about Jennifer at her website, drjennifernash.com, and we will come back to all of the juicy resources that she has available to you. Jennifer, welcome to People First.
Thank you so much for having me, Morag. I'm so excited to be here today.
Oh, we're going to have such a good conversation. And I was sharing with Jennifer in the green room today. I was finishing her book in bed this morning with my morning cup of tea because I couldn't put it down. And I also wanted to make sure I read it before our conversation. And we're going to be talking about her book, Be Human, Lead Human, which you can see behind her on the screen if you're watching. And if you can't, you'll just have to imagine a beautiful cover. However, before we dive in, I want to start with your origin story, Jennifer. So go back to way back when you were a wee girl at elementary school. The teacher says, Jennifer, what do you want to be when you grow up? What was your answer back then? And what was the pivot that got you to doing what you do today?
Oh, so way back at the very beginning, I would have said I wanted to be a prima ballerina. At a very early age, I was put into ballet classes. So I was starting to dance when I was 3 years old. At the same time, my mom was starting to teach me piano. And so I'm also a classically trained pianist. And so the answer would have varied between prima ballerina and classical pianist performing at, going to Juilliard and then performing at Carnegie Hall and then performing on stages around the world. And I would have flip-flopped between those two answers for quite a long time. And then at one point, my parents moved, and so they weren't able to afford to take me to ballet classes anymore. And so I had to stop dancing. But fortunately, in the town we were in, there was a piano teacher, and I was able to continue my piano lessons there. And so having like this background in dance and having a background in music, and also having an aptitude for foreign languages, I was sort of on the right brain side of the house there. And so when I got my first job in industry, I was actually working on a customer support desk, helping French Canadian automotive dealerships figure out how to diagnose their vehicles. And that's how I ended up in industry, because I spoke a foreign language. But if you had asked me if I was going to be in the business world or if I was going to be doing what I was doing now, I would have had no way to tell you that that's where all of these different threads in my life have led me. And it's also why it was so confusing to me when I came into the business world, how people would talk and act, because I didn't understand any of the unwritten cultural rules. I didn't understand, how important it was to have relationships, in the workplace. And I certainly didn't understand what all the sports analogies were about. So it was a very confusing place for me. And so I ended up observing a lot, right? I ended up observing and learning and trying to figure out this world around me that was pretty foreign to me. And out of that came, this desire to really understand what makes some organizations great, what makes some leaders great, and what gets in the way of that. And so I ended up doing an MBA and a PhD, and then I did my research on that, and all of that combined into the book that you just finished this morning with your tea.
It just fills me with joy to hear you talk, because our lives feel like they followed a kind of parallel path. And the things that piqued our curiosity around how business gets done and the people side there are just so many synergies. I mean, in Be Human, Lead Human, you talk about people first. Hey, title of this podcast. You talk about how to connect people and performance, which is our work in both Cultivate the Power of Winning Relationships and the latest book, You, Me, We, Why We All Need a Friend at Work and How to Show Up as One.
Yep.
So let's start there. What's your definition of a relationship at work, a friend at work? What is it for you, and why the heck should we care?
Yeah. So, first of all, organizations that are high trust organizations outperform the market by 286%. So when you think about it, to have a relationship at work, that has to be founded on trust. You need the element of trust there to be able to have a relationship. So what it means to me is I have someone in the workplace who maybe I consider them a friend, maybe I consider them a colleague, but there's someone that I can trust, that I can go to and ask questions when I don't know something. Or I can go to and say, hey, I'm having this issue. I really need to talk it over with somebody. Would you be available? Could we go grab a cup of coffee? Or it's somebody that I can go to and say, you know what, I am not getting along with my boss very well. I don't know how to fix that situation. Do you have any tips? Because I know you worked with this person, a while ago, or, and you were able to figure out a way to navigate, this relationship. So essentially it's having that person that in the workplace that you can go to that maybe not only has that institutional knowledge of how things work and why they work the way they do, maybe they also have some political capital or some social capital in the organization. Maybe there's somebody that you aspire to be down the road. And so you look at them as a mentor and maybe they can take you under their wing and help you. And I would define a relationship as work as an interaction where each person shares and learns something from and with each other so that each person learns and grows from the relationship.
I love everything that you shared there. And it made me chuckle at one point when you talked about, hey, I'm having trouble with my boss. Can you help? Because I was looking at some recent research, both ours and McKinsey. So ours shows that 67% of leaders who've completed our ally mindset profile say that their success has been undermined by the words and actions of a colleague. And the most troublesome relationships tend to be, I'm doing little wings here, our peer relationships, either within our immediate function or across the organization. And McKinsey reported that 75% of employees on one of their recent surveys said that interacting with their boss was the most stressful part of their day. And of course, what I see, and when I read Be Human, Lead Human, is it is one part of the solution to reducing that friction and that interpersonal tension that often holds back not just individual careers, but teams and organizations every day.
Yeah.
So at the heart, your title is Be Human, Lead Human. Tell me about the inspiration for the title.
So the title of the book, honestly, was actually Leading with Heart, the human element. That was the title. But I found out just as I was getting to the point in the book writing process and the editing process where I had to pick the title, that there was another book that was coming out that had a very similar title. And so I was advised to not pick that title.
How stressful, because we had exactly the same happen with You, Me, We had a different title. It was together. And another book came out with the same title, and our publisher was like, oh no, you've got to come up with a new one, and can you do it by yesterday? And wow, that was like, oh, was it the same for you?
Yes, because I felt like my heart was just ripped out. Like this is how I thought of it. It's like you name your baby before it's born, right? And so I had this title, that's how I referred to it. That's how I thought about it. I'd run it by so many people. They loved it. And then all of a sudden I'm like, oh, what do you mean? Like I can't name my baby that? Like I've got to name it something else. So that was hard. But that's how so we ended up with this Be Human, Lead Human, because it really was around, as a leader, leading yourself is so important as well, right? And when you can lead yourself, then other people will follow you. And then dispelling this notion around leaders must be heroes, right? They must be superheroes. Well, I'm inviting people to think about that in a different way. Like, what if leaders are human as well, right? We all put on our pants the same way. So let's look at leadership through that lens and see how we can lead humans and be human while doing it.
I like the nuance there of looking at it both from how I show up for others, but also how I show up for myself. And at the
Yeah.
heart of the book, and you also have a profile that goes alongside it, which I also took this morning, you actually take that word human and turn it into an acronym to help us to think about the relationships and how we're showing up in our relationships at work. So human, help us. What are the letters, what are they standing for in the model that you present in your research?
Sure. So the model that came out of my research is called, one of them is called the humans framework. And so humans is, it's a 6-dimension framework that is held together by relationships because they are the glue that connect all of the different elements in the framework. And so you see that in the, I don't know if you have a picture that you'll show on the video cast, but you'll see that in the iconography when you look at the overall picture. So H stands for hearing, U stands for understanding, M stands for mattering, A stands for appreciating, N stands for inspiring, S stands for seeing. So those are the 6 dimensions of the humans framework.
Okay, and so when you were doing your research, I know when we were doing ours, I found of the humans, if we use your acronym here, there are elements that come naturally to me, and then there are elements that need a little bit of care and attention, even though you wrote it, you created it, you've done the research on it. So when you look at these, which come naturally for you, and where are you having to lean in and pay extra care and attention?
Ooh, that's such a great question. Nobody's asked me that one yet. I love that.
Oh,
So I think the ones that come easiest for me are the hearing. I've always just been someone that people are inclined to start talking with, and I've been told it's because I hear them well and I listen to them well. So that one comes pretty easy for me. I think one of the things that I have to consistently remind myself about is the appreciating. So helping people feel appreciated and making sure that they um, understand that their value is more than just the work output that they're delivering, right? We get so busy in each day, and it's easy to just keep the focus on, the work that's going on when, there's a whole person that surrounds that work, and there's a lot of different factors that they have going on in their life, that if I'm aware of that, it can help me understand them better.
all right. Well, I am playing here behind the scenes and multitasking and listening to you, but I thought I would flash up on screen since it turns out I can do so. Here are
Nice.
my results this morning. And it's interesting because you said hearing is the thing that comes naturally to you. But as you can see, as I share my own, that is the one that I need to lean into and be conscious of. And it was interesting because you kindly show the questions. And one of the questions was along the lines of, do I, Morag, formulate a reply while somebody else is still talking? And I think there is another question around, do I, Morag, interrupt others? And I think the answer on both of those scales is heck yes, all the time. It is already a narrative that's going left, right, and center. Hence, I got distracted and brought up my results. What I'm getting better at, though, is learning to turn the volume down so it's noise at the back. And even though I have 3 questions or things I want to interject, is pausing just a nanosecond longer. So it's not that I'm consistently interrupting, but I am still occasionally interrupting. Or maybe I'm just, deluding myself. I'll have to ask my colleagues. But when you look at this profile of scores here, what, if anything, stands out for you? If you were coaching me, what would you suggest I should be paying attention to?
So definitely the hearing, because that does appear to be your lowest score on the assessment. And I will say, like, you're not alone in that respect. There's many assessments I see that come back that have this kind of profile with hearing as one of the lower scores. I think that sometimes we are so uncomfortable with silence that we want to fill in the gap by saying something. And so that could be a reason why there's an interrupting piece happening. Um, I think it's also like I talk about in the book, there's the degrees of listening and where is your locus of attention, right? Is your locus of attention really on you? And you're already formulating that response before I'm done talking right now. Or is the locus of attention on the other person? And you're absorbing what they're saying, and that's taking a cognitive space so that you don't actually have the bandwidth to be formulating your own response yet. So there's different ways that you can address not only the gap and the interrupting, but also what you are doing while you are listening that
Mhm.
takes up the attention and takes up the bandwidth so that maybe you don't formulate that response, or at least you don't formulate it right away.
So it's interesting, one tactic I've done, and I think we're all guilty of this, is especially when we're on camera, we
Mhm.
like to think we can multitask. And
Yeah.
I would challenge everybody on this, me included, that there has never not been a time where I have not checked an email or glanced down at my phone. And so learning to switch all of those off, having the phone on silent, closing every browser, switching off notifications. So to your
Mhm.
point, my locus is on the conversation at hand versus other things that might be distracting is a better habit that all of us could do more consistently.
Yes.
When
Yeah.
you think about the research you've done, though, what was one of the surprising findings for you?
About the human's dimensions or just in general?
From the human's dimensions, yes.
I would say that it's a combination of the words and the actions, for the leaders who landed at like the outstanding edge of that scale rather than, the average, right? So not only would they say something, for example, but they would also back it up by their action. And so, um, let me give you an example. So there was one of the people that I interviewed, they were they were a manager in a hospital. And they wanted to make sure they believed in lifelong learning. And they wanted to make sure that the people that were reporting to them also had those learning opportunities, right? So the manager sent all of their people to, this training program for the day. And somehow something happened and it got extremely busy, on that floor in the hospital. And normally the manager, would have called them back and said, look, we just got inundated with patients. I need you guys back here stat. Like I can't handle all of this by myself. But the manager knew that she had told them that, learning was important to her and she wanted to role model that for them. And so she allowed them to stay in their training for the day. And she was able to bring in resources from different departments and, different sources that would allow her people to stay in the training and get the learning that she had promised them that they were going to be able to get. And she was able to work out something where she had coverage on the floor for the day. And so to me, that was it was a clear example of, helping people feel that they matter, that they are appreciated, and that they are seen. And that is just one example of so many of the examples that I had, from the research during the case study. Because the default, I think, for most managers would have been to just panic, call all of them
Mhm.
back, tell them the training was off, forget it. It doesn't matter if we invested in it or not. You guys just need to, do your job.
Yep.
Um, yeah, and I think that's what normally would have happened. So it was impressive that this manager was able to remain true to the value that she had of this lifelong learning for herself, but also enable that for her people, which she had promised to do.
I enjoyed that about your book is that it is full of real world pragmatic examples of the components in action or even inaction. And we see some story arcs and journeys unfold throughout the book.
Mhm.
As you think about the ripple effect it's having, how are leaders embracing it and bringing it into their teams and their organizations?
Mhm. Yes, it's had a wide-ranging impact, and there have been groups that have taken the book that I hadn't even anticipated. So, in an organizational setting, I've had organizations bring it in to support, leadership development, professional development for staff. Um, I've had other organizations bring it in to help new employees who are just starting out in the workforce, build their communication skills and build their relationship skills. Um, I have had other organizations have me come in and speak to seasoned leaders who were maybe looking for a different way to lead since COVID because their tools and techniques weren't as effective as they wanted them to be. Um, and I've had other organizations bring me in to explore, how do we think about the evolving role of a leader? What does that look
Mhm.
like today and where is it going? And how is AI helping or hindering that? Right. And so using the lessons in the book, we can apply that to shifting and challenging people's paradigms about leadership today and how they will think about and practice leadership going forward.
Ooh, so there were two threads emerging there, but I want to take the AI route because that's the hot topic. Everybody's talking about
Yeah.
it. Everybody's an expert. But
Yeah.
where do you see that impacting the concepts that people are going to discover in your book?
Mhm. Yes, and so my book came out right before all of this AI exploded, right? So I probably need to have a couple more chapters and re-release it or something. But so, AI, it's shifting how we work. It's shifting when we work. It's shifting why and what we work on. And so part of the role for the leader is to understand what are the changes that AI is having in their space. And then not only understanding the changes, but helping their people understand what that means for them, right? At a very practical, pragmatic level. So, example, what tasks are changing because AI is now an option, right? How will your job change and what will change? And then helping you figure out how do you use AI to affect those changes, right? So the leader's role is not just to be comfortable with AI, but also understand how it's impacting the business and what that looks like strategically, operationally, and tactically. I think there's also an emotional piece of this because people are so afraid that AI is going to take their job, right? And
Hmm.
that a robot is going to replace them. And in some cases, there will be jobs that are lost because of AI. But as we've seen historically, technological advances always create more jobs than they displace. So the jobs that are coming, we don't maybe even know what they are yet. But we do know that we need different skills. We need to upskill. And in some cases, we need to reskill to help our people be successful in that new world of work with AI. So leaders have an opportunity to show how they can integrate those changes and how AI is actually going to help us be more human at work, which is something that I believe because it will take over a lot of the day-to-day administrivia work. It will take over a lot of the basic, crank turning tasks that, people still have to do today. And what does that free us up to do? Well, it frees us up to use our creativity. It frees us up to use our collaboration skills, our communication skills, our emotional intelligence skills, all of these things that the robots and AI can't necessarily do yet, if ever. And
Hmm.
so those skills are the ones that we need to be developing and upskilling and in some cases reskilling our people for. And those skills, as you know very well, are the ones that organizations have placed the least amount of emphasis on and the least amount of training opportunities traditionally.
Yeah, I was reading a statistic earlier this morning that was talking about the gap between being promoted, that first promotion to being a people manager, whether it's a supervisor or however the title, and
Yes,
receiving the first training on how to manage people beyond the don't do this to get us, the legal piece. And
right.
it's 10 years plus. And I know in my own career, there was that sink or swim approach where you're thrown in at the deep end and you either succeed
Likewise.
or you drown in it. And I
Yep.
think you're right. This is an opportunity to lean into the human piece, the how business gets done. And you said it earlier, every relationship is built on a foundation of trust. And without that trust, business slows down, information slows down, and there's friction between people, between teams, between organizations.
Yeah.
So you mentioned COVID.
Yeah.
How has the pandemic and post-COVID, although it feels like a dream, did it really happen? But the reality is a lot of people are trying to go back to the pre-pandemic sort of behaviors. And yet I think for a lot of us, as Ruby on my team would describe it, our patterns are still out of sync. So how has that shifted your understanding or how we approach the be human, lead human in this current environment?
Yes. So there is a tendency for people to want to go back to what they consider normal, right? As you know, people don't like change. We have had nothing but change, and it's going to continue to change. That isn't going to change. But going back to pre-pandemic, what life was like then and what workplaces were like then and how people worked back then, we're never going back to that. I think one of the silver linings that came out of COVID is that it showed organizations and leaders that people can be trusted to work autonomously. People can be trusted to get their work done in a way that works best for them and still deliver what the organization is asking for. 94% of employers rated performance higher than it was prior to the pandemic while people were working at home. So we seem to have forgotten all of that. And, there's a couple elephants in the room here that are also playing into this, how people are working and why people want to go back to status quo and, have people in the office. And, one of those is real estate costs, right? They have all these sunk costs. They put millions and billions into these workplaces that are now sitting empty. And so they want to get a return on that investment. That's one of them. But number two, and very close to that, is this idea of trust. For some reason, we have leaders who still don't trust their people, even though they demonstrated that they could work autonomously without the managers looking over their shoulder or telling them exactly what to do. And COVID allowed people to work from home and set their own schedules and, figure things out and deliver the work, and get all these other responsibilities done that they had to. They had childcare, they had elder care, they had pets, they had all these different things happening that they didn't have to deal with before the pandemic, right? They had people to help them with that. And now we're back in this place where, some of those services are coming back online. People are finding the support systems that they needed, they're coming back into place. And yet the leadership is still thinking, oh, well, we're just going to go back to how it was post-pandemic. And that resistance to change, to me, there's a third reason for that. And it's because there are insufficient tools in the leader toolkits to manage people. They are so comfortable managing projects and tasks, but they had a hard time during COVID figuring out how to lead remotely and manage remotely. And they are still having trouble with that because they didn't get the skills that they needed to do that, right? Just like you mentioned earlier, they were tapped on the head, put into a people leadership role, and they have to figure it out. And that happened during COVID too. They just had to figure out, how am I going to manage if I can't manage by walking around and seeing people sitting in their seats and working? They had to figure out, what are they going to do differently instead? And some of them figured that out and some of them didn't. And so this desire to go back to, pre-pandemic, where, Zoom wasn't a default and people were in the office 5 days a week and dealing with the commute and all of those expenses, that's not coming back. So
yeah. I mean, you talk there, the leaders I'm talking to are saying, well, if you want me to commute into the office as I used to do, that's time I could be reinvesting in working from home that you're going to lose as productivity. And I was reading an article that had coined this phrase, coffee badging. And it goes back to the bad habits of presenteeism and being seen to be in the office, and my jacket is on the back of the chair. And what coffee badging was described as is, I will come into the office long enough to badge in, get a coffee, be seen, maybe leave my jacket, and then go home. Because the irony is, people are coming into the office and then spending all day on Zoom because the colleagues they need to collaborate with aren't physically present. Again, they're still working across time and distance. So I think you're right. There's a lot that is yet to be learned. How are you supporting your leaders then in making that transition and getting the skill set that they need?
So there's a couple things there, right? And we've already talked about one of those. So, leaders that have trouble or are resisting, people still working from home today. Part of that is maybe the organizational structure, right? There's some systemic things built into that need to be addressed. Part of that is, the leader themselves and the skills that they have, and maybe what they need to gain to be more comfortable in that space. Sometimes that's technology, believe it or not.
Mhm.
A lot of people that have trouble using these tools to connect with people remotely. I know that's hard to believe, but I see that every day. Um, I think there's also this element of, how do I deal with this human being as opposed to this employee who's just going to deliver output?
Mm.
That is a huge one. And that is partly what the book is designed to help people with, right? How do we relate to people as human beings? What are the principles and practices that we can use as human leaders to think about and practice leadership differently so that we are leading people and not necessarily leading productivity, profitability, process, or procedure? Um, and I think too, there's also this unwritten cultural rule of, well, if this is how I had to grow up doing this, then this is how you should have to grow up doing it too, because it's not fair that you would get to work 5 days from home and I had to schlep myself to the office 5 days a week, right? There's still something around that as well. And so it's a cultural shift that we're trying to make, essentially.
Well, my guest this week has been Jennifer Nash, Dr. Jennifer Nash, who authored Be Human, Lead Human, How to Connect People and Performance. So Jennifer, as we come to the end of our time together, what final words do you have for our viewers and our listeners, and how can they learn more about the work and the impact that you're having?
Mhm. I think one of the final things I would say is, we are all figuring this out together. And so having patience with each other, seeking to understand before seeking to be understood, and really hearing and listening to what people are saying is so important to help us navigate this new normal. And if you don't know, it's okay. And asking questions of your employees, what they need to be successful today and how they can perform at their best today, is one of the best ways you can figure out, what does this new normal actually look like? And maybe that's different for each person. And maybe there isn't this whole set of HR rules that we have to strictly follow. Maybe it is just, when we design this and curate it for people and we ask them what they need, and then they're able to perform at their best, we end up needing fewer rules and regulations. So that's just something to think about and consider as you're looking at how to navigate the new world of work today. If people want to learn more about me and the services that I have, or find out more about the book, they can go to drjennifernash.com, which is drjennifernash.com. There they'll find information about the book. They'll find information about the Human Leader Community, which is on Facebook. They'll also find information about the Human Leader Index, like you showed earlier during our conversation, Morag. And they'll find some other fun swag and information and resources that are also located in the back of the book. Those are available online as well.
Well, Jennifer, thank you for your time and insights today. I look forward to future opportunities for us to bring our thinking and our research together and get out there on the dance floor. And I look forward to seeing you soon.
Likewise. Thank you so much, Morag. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much for joining Morag today. If you enjoyed the show, please like and subscribe so you don't miss a thing. If you learned something worth sharing, share it. Cultivate your relationships today when you don't need anything before you need something. Be sure to follow Sky Team and Morag on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And if you have any ideas about topics we should tackle, interviews we should do, or if you yourself would like to be on the show, drop us a line at info@skyteam.com. That's SKYE team.com. Thanks again for joining us today, and remember, business is personal and relationships matter. We are your allies.